I'm starting another mixed media piece. It's an 18 by 24, and the brand of paper that I use is Strathmore mixed media paper. It's heavy and it can really take a lot of paint. So I'm starting the painting in the same manner with some graphite marks and some water-soluble pencil. The one thing that I normally do is I clip the paper onto my giant clipboard, and along the bottom, to hold the bottom edge of the paper, I have a large rubber band that I think I bought at Office Depot. I bought a bag of them. They come in really handy to keep your paper tight against the clipboard. So now I'm adding gesso. I use Liquitex brand gesso. And I generally use a pretty wet brush to start the process. I don't have a special way of putting the gesso on the paper. My goal is to just spread it around. So it activates the paper, blends some of the graphite and the water-soluble pencil. I jumped right in to adding paint onto this particular piece, and I'm using a rubber spatula brush. So I'm just smearing some deep turquoise into the gesso and onto the paper. Not in any special manner. I'm just spreading the paint, waking up the paper, loosening up my arm, and preparing the painting to move forward. So now I'm taking a brush and smearing the paint around, still just the turquoise deep. Not thinking too much, just smearing the paint. So now I'm adding some Viridian onto the turquoise deep, and again, at this point of the painting, my brush strokes are really random. My goal is to just bring some excitement to the underpainting so that when the painting's finished, some of this will peek through. So I wasn't happy with the amount of paint that I put on. So now I'm using a paper towel to smear that around and to take some of the moisture and the wet paint off of the paper. My easel was a little wiggly, so I decided to tighten it up a little bit and move the clipboard around. It's an old easel. It's about 45 years old, maybe even older than that. So it's been around a long time, and every once in a while it gets a little squeaky. So it needed a little adjustment. It's time for another layer of pencil. I'm using some water-soluble pencils. I really don't remember what brand they are. I don't think they're Inktense. I think it may be Artist Loft brand from Michaels. So I'm just doing some random marks, scraping into the paint in places where the paint's a little heavier. And then I decided to come back in with a really yummy color of an Inktense block. It's a very dark ultramarine. These are really fabulous mark making tools. They blend beautifully with water and they blend beautifully into wet paint. So now I'm taking a wet brush and smearing ink into the wet paint. And I'm using that wonderful frayed brush that I always gravitate to. Somehow it always makes the most perfect marks. There I'm just adding a little gesso and scraping and pulling the paint through. So I'm getting ready to put some heavy body Liquitex paint on, and at this point, again, I'm not thinking too much about composition. It's really more about the colors, adding different colors to the painting and seeing how they play against one another. So this is a beautiful violet blue that I just picked up the other day. So this is the first time that I'm using it. And I'm really pleased with the value of this paint. Almost has a little gray hint to it. Onto another color of violet. I'm using a golden paint this time and deciding exactly where I want to place it. So the violet that I just added has a little bit of red tone to it, and it's really starting to pop against the other violet tones and the blues that I had put down previously. I'm beginning to block in some organic shapes, taking consideration of where I'm placing them a little more, and preparing to add another color onto the palette. So I decided on a darker green. It's a Golden brand paint. And I'm using my favorite stick brush. The brush that has just a few bristles and is mostly stick. But it does the most amazing things when you mix paint into it. I love the scratchiness that this brush adds to a painting and the quality of the brush strokes. You never really know until you experiment with different tools. And you know, that's the magic part about painting. It's your work, so you can really do whatever you want to do with it. Now I'm ready to really add some contrast. So I'm pulling that beautiful Azo yellow into this work. And again, when you mix that Azo yellow with the violets or purples, you get a really yummy, beautiful brown or really earthy tone that I just love against the purples and the blues. I'm ready to add another green to the painting. This time it's a Golden brand cobalt green and a square brush this time. I've been using round brushes and then my stick brush too. So this is a deeper green, has some hints of brown in it. And I used my hand to smudge some of the color into the wet paint. I'm carrying the color up to the top of the piece as well, and then dragging it back through the main section of the painting to pull that color through. During my painting process, I flip my paintings over. It always gives me a different perspective, helps me balance out the composition a little bit, and to see where it leads my eyes, and areas that I can leave soft to rest your eyes, or areas that I want to develop more. I'm adding some turquoise deep back into the painting. Thanks, Libby. I know you're here. My kitty, she's always here in my studio. If you notice, I keep moving my brush from top to bottom of the painting. It never stays in one area for too long of a time. That's because while I'm painting, my eyes are always searching for other spots to place that color in, so that it keeps your eye traveling around the work. I keep moving the brush around, creating more shapes and tying areas together through line. And now I'm ready to come back in with that beautiful lavender blue color and block in some larger spaces with it. So right now in the painting, there's probably, I really haven't kept count, but there's probably like 8 to 10 layers of different colors that have come into the painting. Colors that I've used straight from the tube, and then colors that are created by blending color into color. So I'm adding some graphite, water-soluble graphite, adding another layer of line and shape. The brand of water-soluble crayon that I use are called Lyra, and they make several different kinds. They make water-soluble, and then they make non-water-soluble crayons. I love the way that they layer over the acrylic paint. I love to move them through wet paint and pull different paint colors together. Now I'm using a more fluid paint. It's a Blick brand, and it's a real pale lavender color, maybe with a little tint of gray in it. So I paused a little bit to consider where to place this color, and surprised at how pink it looked on the paper. Pulling in some larger shapes and repeating my shapes throughout the painting. So I scooped up a little bit of gesso onto the same brush that I was using with that light violet, and began to block in some shapes at the top of the painting. The paint in some of the areas is still wet, and so I'm picking up other colors along the way. That's what makes your work interesting. not keeping the colors straight from the tube, but mixing them. This piece has come a long way from the very beginning. If you remember, it started with graphite and gesso and turquoise. And now we have this beautiful field of violets and blues and greens and earthy tones. Layers of graphite, layers of water-soluble pencil. I'm identifying some little spaces to fill in with some greens. Not so precise on where I'm placing them. Wherever my eye hits, I'm just placing the color, reacting to what color is next to it. I'm adding more turquoise to my palette, bringing that back into the painting. And as the paint begins to dry on the paper, the top colors that I'm adding stay a little more vibrant. Their color stays a little more true to how they come out of the tube. So I'm blocking in some more areas. Kind of a triangular shape. But the edges are really rough. It's not a perfect triangle. And that's what I like. The imperfection is what I look for in my work. Bringing in more of the azo yellow. And again, that was azo yellow added onto an area where the paint was a little drier. So the color was more true to what it actually comes out of the tube as. I'm always intrigued at how paint mixes and what one color does to another color when it's placed next to each other. I love roughing up areas with graphite, smearing the paint and making marks into the paper. I'm really very, very happy with the progress that I've made and where the colors and the marks and the lines and the shapes are leading me. It's always a magical ride. I'm rummaging around for the perfect green color of Prisma pencil, and I had to open a bag full of pencils to find just the right one. So I'm adding that to the painting along with a violet colored Prisma pencil. These are a wax-based pencil, and they do magical things in paint. So I added some more areas of line, subtle line, and in the end it might barely show through, but I know it's there and that it's part of my process. So it's something that I continue to do. More gesso on the brush to block in some areas. And I'm pondering on exactly where I'm going to place it. So I made the decision and I took the leap of faith and decided to block in an area. Again, it's not pre-planned. It's one mark leading to another mark, to another idea, to another color, and I just keep going with it until I'm happy, which happens most of the time. Some of the paint is still wet in areas, so it's making some of the most luscious colors. In these areas, eventually when the gesso dries, you'll still be able to peek through them and still see some of the original marks. So it's very, very, very subtle what gesso does when you apply it with your paint instead of using white. So I'm pulling more of that beautiful soft lilac back through and running the brush vertically and horizontally on the paper, playing with shape. Now this was really unexpected. I just reached over on my table and pulled a pencil up, and it was kind of a red violet. And I just started scraping back into the paint with it and decided that I really liked it, so I began to do more. So back in with some pencil and some graphite. Making marks, pulling more color through. And then I had an idea. I had an old gelato stick, which is kind of a water-soluble, pasty-like, gel-like crayon that was just about empty. And I really loved the green color of it. So I opened it up and used the end of a paintbrush to dig some of that color out, and that's what I'm scraping onto the paper. I'm not having very much luck on getting enough out to really make an impact, but I know it's there. So I started smudging some of it with my fingers. And happy with the end results. I'm doing a lot of rummaging, trying to find just the right paint, crayon, pencil for my next move. At this point, I'm really not sure. I'm just searching. So bear with me as I ruffle through my paint containers, my bags full of pencils, and little nooks and crannies filled with art supplies. When I begin to pause my brush, that's me thinking. So I'm starting to become more deliberate on where I'm placing the color. I've added a neutral raw umber mixed with a little bit of gesso. And I'm actually questioning that move, but pushing forward just to see where it takes me. So I'm getting ready to add a pop of orange to the painting, and I was really quite surprised to see where it took me. So I mixed a little vermilion with some azo yellow and brought that back in to add a little bit of zing to the blues and the lavenders and the purples. Still has a hint of that azo yellow to it and really looked beautiful sitting next to the other colors. So I kept going. I moved to the upper left-hand corner of the painting and brought some neutral color up into that area. And I'm working, trying to bring in a little more interest up in that section, but decided it really wasn't something that I wanted to do. So I keep pulling the paint through, trying to figure it out, making more shapes and brush strokes in the wet paint, but ultimately deciding that I really didn't like it there. So I came back in with a wet brush, wet the paint, and took a paper towel and started wiping that area back. So now I'm coming back in with the beautiful blue lilac-y color and tying in some shapes over the area that I had just wiped back. Going back down to the bottom and filling in some areas, and then pulling the paint color up to the top of the painting as well. I think I'm really getting close to being at a stopping point with this piece. So I take a step back, analyze it for a few seconds, and decide what my next step is going to be. So more graphite, more marks, more line. Completing my process until I'm finally happy that I can either stop at this point and have this piece be finished, or ponder it for a few days and possibly go back in and add a few things. But as of now, it's one that I really like. So for now, it's just going to stay just as it is.